spread the word and let people know exactly what we're facing as a species of our future. But if that's bumming you out, don't leave, because the second half is what we're going to do about it. And so the second half is also taken from studies of social science, the Extinction Rebellion strategy and tactics about how we want to make governments take those steps to transform our economies, transform our lives, transform our civilization, to make them carbon neutral, comes from studies of social science and social movements before that have affected transformative change in society. And so we'll do, half of the talk will be about that, about what action we actually need to take as well. So Extinction Rebellion Ireland, Extinction Rebellion globally, we've got three basic global demands. Now these differ kind of if you go to France, if you go to South America, if you go to the UK, but generally they all align. So the first one is to tell the truth, that we demand governments and other agencies, such as media agencies, tell the truth to the population about the climate crisis and the ecological crisis that we face. That this should be mainstream news, this should be top of the news agenda, and it shouldn't be buried or non-existent. Because without knowing the truth, how can you act on it? And so the second demand that we have is that governments act, and they act now. And they act to go carbon neutral. In Ireland, we're demanding that the government goes carbon neutral by 2030 at the very latest. This depends usually what year you put on this by just how rich a society is and how fast they can affect that change. But in Ireland, as a rich society, we need to be able to do that fast. So 2030 needs to be the target. And the third demand is that it's called beyond politics. And it's that the changes that we need to transform our society come from the people, come from the ground up, come from people and citizens' assemblies, not from the top down, not from politicians with vested interests, not from lobbyists, not from corporations, but it's people deciding in their communities how we want to react to climate change and build sustainable new communities for ourselves. So those are our three demands globally. As I said, this is going to be a two-parter, one, heading for extinction, and two, what we're going to do about it, how we're going to act. So to begin the heading for the extinction talk, it's pretty clear that climate change, the climate crisis and ecological crisis has been in our news, in our lives like never before. It suddenly exploded. And these are a series of headlines from affecting areas around the world from just the past week. In India, we've seen a horrific heat wave, temperatures smashing all records, over 50 degrees every single day in parts of India. Stories of people dropping dead on their way to work, in trains, on buses, no longer able to take the heat, which has become the new norm. In Somalia, over 2 million people are at the risk of starvation because of prolonged drought, also blamed on the climate crisis. Of course, the women and the children, the most vulnerable, being affected by that crisis, which is happening right now. And in the USA last November, we saw that horrific fire that destroyed the village of Paradise in Northern California. But in the past month, the USA has been experiencing very strange and extreme weather with floods, tornadoes, actually decimating the Midwest, destroying farmers' livelihoods. In 1 week, or even less one weekend, there was over 200 tornadoes recorded in just one small part near Kansas. So these kind of weather conditions that have just never been seen before, driving climate change into the news all over the world. And you may have seen this picture from just yesterday. This went viral. This is a picture taken by a researcher in Greenland. It looks like his sled dogs are walking on water. What they're actually walking on is, up to their ankles, is frozen water from ice that's melted in Greenland ice caps. So it's visual symbols like this that show us an indication of just how much trouble we're in. This also from the past week. We had a relatively cold June in Ireland. At times it felt like winter, but it's not been like that for the rest of the world. And especially it's not been like that for parts of Africa, India, but most tellingly, in the Arctic Circle, in Siberia, in Norway and Sweden, in the northern areas, it's been reaching 29, 30 degrees inside the Arctic Circle in summer. And as you can imagine, this kind of climate, these kind of temperatures are simply not normal. But we must always keep in mind that this is about people and individual people. So I like to play this short clip which just kind of brings home the effect of climate change. And it's from Mozambique, where earlier this year Mozambique was hit by 2 major cyclones, one after the other, which had never happened before in history. And so we must always keep in mind that when we're talking about climate change and the climate crisis, that it's people that are at the heart of it. And I hope the sound works a little bit, because it was a little bit difficult to set up. Let's see. So this is the really huge impact of the climate and ecological crisis on human beings that's happening right now as we speak. So what I want to do is just go through a bit of the basic science, because it's very helpful to know this, and as I say, to be able to kind of tell other people about it and why this is happening. And I'm going to kind of start right at the foundations. I should say that most my sources that I use for this are NASA and the Irish Environmental Protection Organization. So what are greenhouse gases? What is the greenhouse effect? What is happening? Well, we obviously get our heat from the sun. But what is really important to keeping heat in the Earth and keeping us at an ambient temperature 15 degrees fit for life is the fact that we have an atmosphere. If we didn't have this atmosphere, we'd be a cold, barren planet at minus 100 degrees. So our atmosphere that keeps us 15 degrees, and it does that by the greenhouse effect. So inside this atmosphere, we have carbon dioxide, water vapor, methane, chemicals, greenhouse gas chemicals that are keeping us around 15 degrees. And it keeps us nice, Goldilocks zone, fantastic. So sun's rays bounce off the Earth, and they're absorbed by these greenhouse gas molecules, and they can emit greenhouse gases for hundreds, sometimes longer, and keep us at this nice temperature. And that's when everything's working, it's great. But the problem is that we're now in is that we have emitted more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than we almost have records for. We have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now than the last, not just 400 years as this graph shows, 400,000 years, 800,000 years. And we're basically playing an incredible Russian roulette experiment on ourselves. We are putting so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we are literally unsure of how this plays out or what happens. It's never been done before while human beings have been on planet Earth. We live as human beings on a climate in an atmosphere that's never been experienced before. And as this short clip from NASA will show, this increase of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is heating our planet. What's also important to know is that although our planet has been heating since the Industrial Revolution because we've been pumping fossil fuels into the atmosphere, it has really, really accelerated since the late 1980s, 1990. In fact, we have put more carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere since we've known about the effects of global warming than we did before. So we've known about its cataclysmic impact, but we've actually accelerated, and we continue to accelerate as well. So you can see this is a graph here from 1860 to almost 2020, and you can see it's increases regularly until you get to about 1980 when it really takes off. But the good news is we've got the Paris Agreement, right? Everything hunky-dory. They all got together and agreed to keep the global temperature below 2 degrees, heck, 1.5 if we can bother, and to pursue all non-binding, nothing statutory, nothing in law agreements to do that. And they kind of said to the world, great, don't worry about it, fantastic. But the problem with well, there's lots of problems with the Paris Agreement, but there's two key ones that I want to bring out and tell you guys about. And this is to say that after Paris, of course, at the end of last year in November, we started getting headlines like this. Major climate report describes strong risk of crisis as early as 2040. 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe, warns UN. So how did we go from the Paris Agreement, with everyone slapping each other in the back, congratulating each other on saving the world, to just less than 2 years later, all newspapers report saying we've only got 12 years to save the Earth? Well, it's because they left things out of the Paris Agreement that are really, really important. And one is the fact that the oceans are warming even faster than we ever previously imagined. Actually, 94% of the heat from carbon dioxide from the greenhouse gas effect is being absorbed by our oceans right now. They are taking an incredible amount of punishment on a scale that we never knew. A new report from January 2019 from the journal Science, one of the most prestigious journals, said that Earth's oceans are warming 40% faster than the UN previously predicted. Energy is entering the Earth at a rate of about 3 Hiroshima bombs per second from 1990 to 2015, and that has increased to 4 Hiroshima bombs since 2015. The ocean is absorbing an incredible amount of this heat, and in fact, if the ocean wasn't absorbing it, the average temperature on Earth would have increased by 37 degrees Celsius by now. The only reason we're alive is that the ocean is absorbing this heat. And so, in fact, when we look at just how fast the ocean is heating up, when you hear about 1 degree, 1.5 degree, 2 degree, that's land temperature. That's not ocean temperature. Ocean temperature is increasing at twice, sometimes in the poles, 3 times that speed and more. This is putting our oceans and the wildlife in our oceans, which feed many, many millions and millions of people, and the most vulnerable people in the world, at extreme risk. And those mammals and animals are at extreme risk of extinction. But what else does warmer oceans do? Well, one of the biggest things that they do when you look at TV, when you look at hurricanes, when you look at cyclones, is that they make storms stronger. Hurricanes are formed by warm water being sucked up into the atmosphere, into clouds, and the more warm water that's sucked up, the stronger the storm. And so that is why we're going to see more severe hurricanes and storms. Warmer water, especially at the poles, obviously means more melting ice caps. Sea level rises, and in fact, you would get sea level rises even if you had no melting ice caps, because warmer water expands. And in fact, a lot of the rising sea levels that we're going to see in this century is going to come from just the fact that the ocean is warmer and that water is expanding, not just the melting of the ice caps. Coral bleaching, and of course, fish migration and death. Fish are incredibly sensitive to the heat in the ocean, and so are their eggs. And in fact, eggs won't hatch if there's just 1 or 2 degree differences in that ocean temperature, leading to fish extinction and a lack of food for many, many millions, if not billions of people. And it's reasons like this that we've seen Cyclone Aida and other massive cyclones hitting parts of the world in ways that have never happened before, and this is going to continue into the future. But what about Ireland? We are an island. We are surrounded by water. We are surrounded by this ocean, which is taking such a brunt of the climate crisis. Apologies for a bit of a cutoff there, but basically what more and more research has been done, what we can expect to see, and research by Newcastle University said that Irish cities are amongst the worst affected in Europe for flooding in the next century. In fact, Cork is in a huge amount of trouble for the amount of flooding that we can expect to see there, but also Galway, Dublin, and all coastal cities are at huge risk of stronger storms, storms that have more water because the water's warmer, sucked up into them, and then that gets deposited on our country. And it goes to say fishing is absolutely dramatically going to be affected. Fish stocks are migrating to different parts of the world. They're following different ocean currents, different temperatures that they're more used to being at. They're not hatching, they're not reproducing at rates that they previously were. So the Irish fishing industry stocks are already falling, and they're going to fall a lot further in this century as well. And we also see Gerald Fleming, former head of forecasting at Met Éireann, saying that there's significant changes in the way that Irish summers and Irish winters are going to happen. We're going to see far more extremes. We're going to see heat waves in the summer, and we're going to see colder winters. And so this is going to impact very much our day-to-day life. And the fingerprint of climate change, he says, is becoming more and more evident. So we're definitely going to be impacted in a big way by the climate crisis, in particular because we're an island nation and because the water around us is absorbing so much of the extra heat in the atmosphere. That was probably the good one. To be honest. The really bad one is feedback loops. And really, if you want to talk to a person about the climate crisis and you want to tell them about one thing about why we really, really need to do something, it's feedback loops. So again, back to these guys all celebrating, slapping each other in the back. The Paris Agreement did not take into account climate feedback loops. And as you're going to see, they're really, really important because they are what push our climate system into a state of chaos that we can never, ever get back under control. So there are many feedback loops, but I want to start with this one, the Arctic feedback loop, because I think it's probably one it's the most accessible and one of the most important. So we have significant proportions of the Earth, obviously covered by ice caps. And they do more than just be there cool and cold. Because they're reflective, because they're white, when the sun's heat radiation hits off them, that heat bounces off and goes back off into space. It's not absorbed. So they have a cooling effect. They keep us cooler than we would otherwise be. This is called the albedo effect. So where we have white surfaces, heat bounces off. But when it gets warmer and the water gets warmer and the ice caps melt, that nice white surface that's reflecting the heat away turns to dark water. And dark water absorbs heat. So it becomes a cycle whereby temperatures rise, Arctic ice melts. As that ice melts, disappears, more heat is absorbed by the water, temperatures rise, and becomes a self-sufficient cycle that you can't break. It just keeps going faster and faster. It's a self-reinforcing effect. It's a big problem. If all carbon emissions were to be halted immediately, from tomorrow we don't do any more carbon emissions, the Arctic region would still warm by more than 5 degrees Celsius by the century's end, and potentially as high as 9 degrees. Scientists fear Arctic heating could trigger melting permafrost, which creates a runaway warming effect. So, what is melting permafrost if everything wasn't bad enough? So almost a quarter of the land in the northern hemisphere has permafrost underneath it. What is permafrost made up? It's made up of, well, a lot of ice, a lot of frozen material, but it's actually made up of a lot of kind of nature that's accumulated over thousands, millions, millennia of years. So there's actually a lot of diseases mixed in there as well, and really kind of toxic elements. It's basically the worst of the worst. As permafrost thaws, it releases a greenhouse gas called methane, which is 25 to 100 times better at absorbing and adding heat to our atmosphere than carbon dioxide is. And there's more than enough methane under the permafrost right now to end the world many, many, many times over. And so if that permafrost melts, it's game over. We don't have a hope. And so we need to keep this permafrost from melting. So we have these feedback loops that are reinforcing each other. So as the Arctic melts and gets warmer, the surrounding area in the northern hemisphere is also warming up and the permafrost is melting. So these are reinforcing effects. And these are two articles from this week. And in fact, I think the one on the right may be even from today, in that recent studies of the Arctic permafrost is seeing that they are way ahead of what we expected. Permafrost is melting 70 years sooner than predicted, and this is a real warning light that we are in serious, serious trouble. But what happens in the Arctic doesn't just stay in the Arctic. There are about, sorry, there should be a picture of the Earth behind this, don't know why that hasn't come out, but there's about 13 or 14 different feedback loops in the Earth. So you can see we've got the Arctic sheet, we've got the permafrost, but we also have the Amazon rainforest, Antarctic ice sheets, coral reefs, and they're all part of self-reinforcing cycles that when one breaks, it has a cascading effect that breaks another, and eventually you get pushed into what's called a hothouse Earth state from which there is no return. And in fact, scientists in August 2018 released a paper saying that even if we ended all emissions tomorrow, because we have started these self-reinforcing cycles in the Arctic ice is melting, the permafrost is melting, we're cutting down the Amazon rainforest, that even if we stop tomorrow, we could still enter a hothouse Earth state from which we cannot recover. So you might be feeling, how long have we known about this and not kind of done anything or done anything substantive? I'm hearing that, we're facing the end of civilization, we're facing the end of the world. Well, we've known since about 1988 when Dr. James Hansen went and testified before the Senate in the United States and said, climate change is real, it's going to have a huge impact, we have to do something about it. George W. Bush, the first Bush president, even came up with a climate action plan. He said we're going to do something. Even Margaret Thatcher did, and then nothing happened. And since then, from 1988, of course, emissions continue to increase. And last year we saw the second largest emissions increase globally that we've ever seen in our history. So how much more warming can we expect by the year 2100, when I think we can expect maybe some of our children, especially our grandchildren, to be alive? Well, if we continue our current commitments, we're looking at 3.5 degrees of warming. If we continue business as usual, just doing exactly what we're doing right now, we're looking at 4.5 degrees Celsius of warming. So what does 4 degrees of warming look like? Or how does this play out? What are we going to start noticing about the climate and what's going to happen in the world? Well, what's going to happen if we look at about a 4 degrees world is everything in yellow and brown is uninhabitable. These are parts of the world that people will no longer be able to live anymore, and we'll all try and migrate north or south. We'll probably start living in Western Antarctica, and Northern Europe, Northern Siberia, North America is going to get very, very busy. So how we react to this culturally is going to be very important. As you can see, we're all already, people are trying to cross the Mediterranean and we're leaving them to drown. What's it going to be like when instead of that's 1,000 people or 2,000 people, when that's 500 or 1 billion people? The UN estimates, on an average, their average estimate of climate refugees from South America by the year 2050 will be 500 million people. How is the US southern border going to deal with that, for example? Are we going to build walls? Or are we going to help each other out and welcome climate refugees? I hope we welcome them. But this is the world that we're looking at. We're going to have to migrate to the poles. And in fact, the last time there was this much carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, in Antarctica, there was trees and there was animals living there. So it's not too surprising that we see people probably going to migrate there. Dr. James Hansen, so I said testified before the Senate committee in 1988. Here he is being arrested for taking part in climate direct action outside the White House about 25 years later. So to end the first part of the talk, I'm going to play a little clip from Greta Thunberg. I hope the audio works, as I say. It's been a little bit quiet, but let's give it a shot.
Our house is on fire. I am here to say our house is on fire. According to the IPCC, we are less than 12 years away from not being able to undo our mistakes. At places like Davos, people like to tell success stories, but their financial success has come with an unthinkable price tag. And on climate change, we have to acknowledge that we have failed. All political movements in their present form have done so. And the media has failed to create broad public awareness. But Homo sapiens have not yet failed. Yes, we are failing, but there is still time to turn everything around. We can still fix this. We still have everything in our own hands. Now is the time to speak clearly. Solving the climate crisis is the greatest and most complex challenge that Homo sapiens have ever faced. The main solution, however, is so simple that even a small child can understand it. We have to stop the emissions of greenhouse gases. And either we do that or we don't. You say nothing in life is black or white, but that is a lie, a very dangerous lie. Either we prevent a 1.5 degree of warming or we don't. Either we avoid setting off that irreversible chain reaction beyond human control or we don't. Either we choose to go on as a civilization or we don't. That is as black or white as it gets. We must change almost everything in our current societies. The bigger your carbon footprint is, the bigger your moral duty. The bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as if you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if the house was on fire. Because it is.
So, on to part two. What are we going to do about it? How do we act like the house is on fire? We've had a lot of great environmental movements over the past 20 or 30 years. Really inspiring activists who have written to their TDs or signed petitions, gone on marches. These are all, I've done many of them myself, but we have to face facts on this issue. It hasn't worked. We've stemmed a little bit the flow of greenhouse gases, but in the time since 1988, they've increased by 60%. So we need new strategy, new tactics, particularly in the global north. And so Extinction Rebellion activists, I think it's fair to say, most of us have felt the panic that Greta Thunberg says we have to feel. And we've come out the other side going, all right, we probably have one shot left at transformative change. We probably have one shot left at preventing that irreversible collapse of our climate. So we've got to choose the right tactics and the right strategy. So a group of Extinction Rebellion activists went and did research and looked at what tactics are best to achieve the transformative change that we need. And a lot of it draws on a paper by Erica Chenoweth and her colleague Stefan. They did a lot of research into mass social movements of change. In fact, every single mass social movement of change from the year 1900 to today, that had had over 100 eyewitnesses they catalogued. Erica Chenoweth's initial theory was that violent rebellion was the most likely to get you the change that you wanted. But in fact, through her research, what she found was that non-violent campaigns are likely to win legitimacy, attract widespread international support, neutralize security opponents, and commit loyalty shifts. In short, they were more likely to be successful, and not just a little bit more likely to be successful, they were twice as likely to be successful as violent rebellions. That is not to say that they worked every time, but when looking for a strategy and a tactic to use, non-violent civil disobedience is the one that is most likely to get you the change that you want. And that trend is actually becoming more prominent as the decades go on. We are seeing more non-violent civil disobedience protests succeed and get the transformative change they want, and violent rebellions are actually becoming less and less prominent. So we choose this tactic because it's most likely to win. You're probably familiar with aspects of it from people like Martin Luther King, the Yugoslav movement upward that overthrew Slobodan Milosevic in the year 2000 by using these tactics. And also right now on the streets of Hong Kong, an incredible 25% of the population have taken to the streets demanding their civil liberties and civil rights. We've also seen the civil non-disobedience tactic used prominently in Algeria this year and in Sudan as well. So this is really a strategy and a tactic that we as global North activists have had to listen and learn from the global South, where they use it to great effect on a regular basis. The civil resistance model I'm speaking about has 6 basic steps any of us can follow, share, tell our neighbors, friends about. Number 1, you need mass cross-community participation. This is absolutely key for the society that you want to build. I assume hopefully that you want everyone to live in that society, so you need to create a movement that involves everyone. This is one of the big Achilles heel problems with violent rebellion. It tends to be the domain of young men. But just about anyone can take part in peaceful civil disobedience. Think about a child who doesn't want to be fed. Even they take part in peaceful and non-violent civil disobedience. It's very hard to do something to a child when they don't want you to. So you need mass cross-community participation. You need to get everyone. You need to reach as many elements of your community as you can. That's absolutely key. 2, you have to go to the capital city. You need to get into the faces of the elites, into the faces of the people who run the country, and disrupt their day-to-day. That's also where the media is. I mean, it's unfortunate. Wish that you could spread it out and say it's effective, but you need to be doing this in the capital city en masse, so that they really notice you. They have to look out their window and see you. 3, you have to break the law. It can't simply be a protest march from A to B where the police watch you and everything's they go, say it, night, go home. You need to do something disruptive. You need, whether it's, for example, if you want to hurt the economy, you need to disrupt financial centers, you need to do things that are illegal and get attention. 4, it has to stay nonviolent. It absolutely has to be nonviolent. And for that reason, it links back to number 1, because you need everyone, as many people as involved. If someone comes to you and says, do you want to come to the protest that's happening at 6 o'clock, and you come along at 6 o'clock, take a look at it, and they're throwing bottles, you're very unlikely to want to take part in that. But if they're all chatting, kind of having a good time, where there's a nice atmosphere and ambience to it, you're far more likely to want to jump in and take part, and so are other people as well. 5, it has to go on day after day. This is really key, and this is actually what people are really good at the global South. And we saw in Sudan, we see in Hong Kong right now. People stay on the streets day after day. If you remember the Iraq war protest, like in London, over 1 million people marched. But they just marched for one, and the war happened. Think if 1 million people had camped outside Houses of Parliament day after day after day, demanding no war. I think it would be a very different outcome. You've got to stay on the streets continuously and escalate. You've got to increase your disruption day after day. That's really key as part of your strategy. And 6, as much as possible, it sounds strange to say, but it's got to be fun. You've got to try and make it fun. Because if things are fun, people stay longer. People are more likely to camp out day after day, and you're more likely to get people on the fence to join you. So if you follow these 6 steps, you're very likely to get the mass transformative change that you're looking for. And in Erica Chenoweth's research, she found a golden rule, the 3.5% success rule, which is that every single campaign they studied that had the active, and sustained support of 3.5% of the population won. Nonviolent campaigns, much more likely, as I've said before, to include gender, class, age, rural city, and physical ability, all mixed in together. The safety in numbers, once you have that cross-section of society and 3.5% actively engaged continuously, every single example she studied were victorious. And so that's a magic number for campaigners, to get 3.5% of the population onto the streets. So you might be asking, doing some mental arithmetic, what's 3.5% of Ireland's population? It's around 130,000 people. So we already have 11,000 student strikers willing to go out in the streets, so we just need about 120,000 more. And I imagine as climate change and the climate crisis and ecological crisis keeps getting worse and worse and worse, I think we're going to hit that number relatively soon. So you can see these kind of 6 different points, rules to success, hopefully seen in the Easter Rebellion that took place in London and around the world in April. So if anyone wasn't familiar with it, what we did was that we took over 5 key sites in the capital city, in the center of London, with about 6,000 people. We tried to get as many people from cross society as possible. So we blockaded Oxford Circus, Waterloo Bridge, Parliament Square, Vauxhall, we had a human blockade there, Piccadilly Circus, and Marble Arch. And we stayed there day after day after day. In fact, we lasted a week. We broke the law. We disrupted traffic. We disrupted business as usual. I disrupted a public highway, which I'm very, very proud of, which I was arrested for and spent a few hours at Her Majesty's pleasure. Yeah, thank you. Were you convicted? Don't have the food. I am currently under investigation. Thank you very much. Exactly, yeah. This is not a place for legal advice, but if you want one piece of legal advice, is give no comment interviews and have a solicitor. I swear to God, do not take the duty solicitor. Have a solicitor you want to call who knows what she's doing. She was brilliant. And so this lasted about 7 days, right? And so I've got a little video to show, which I hope demonstrates when you're a peaceful, nonviolent protester, when you've got numbers and you've got a strategy, just how difficult that makes it for the authorities to deal with you.
Heading towards the cliff, we're falling down. And if we don't stop the moderate exploitation of non-renewable resources, we are going to die.
Extinction Rebellion is the protest that has gridlocked the city. For the last 1,000 climate change protesters have blocked 4 of London's key roadways and junctions. But it's not just the streets that have been paralysed. Police and politicians have also been left impotent, apparently lacking any means of dealing with protesters who reject all violence and whose cause, greenhouse gas reductions, is actually official government policy. For some police officers, the dilemma and the boredom of standing guard over such well-behaved demonstrators has been too much. But the reality is that, in the absence of any violence, their powers are limited. They can try to use the laws of public order or obstructing the highway, but the protesters' human rights to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly mean the police have to be careful about arrests. There are practical problems too. Many demonstrators have glued or locked themselves to obstacles, so trying to use force risks injuring them. And the Met Police is all too aware of how it might look to drag away thousands of peaceful protesters by force. The presence of celebrities like actress Emma Thompson, a keen supporter of Extinction Rebellion, adds to those tensions.
I've been with Greenpeace to the Arctic twice. I've stood on the bare glaciers. I've seen the plastic in the oceans. I've seen evidence for myself, and I really do care about my children and my grandchildren enough to want to be here today to stand next to the next generation.
Politicians have criticised the police, but for them the dilemma is even greater. Hardly a word has been heard from Greg Clark, the Energy Secretary, who is supposedly responsible for reducing Britain's greenhouse gas emissions. Sajid Javid, whose Conservative Party leadership may even depend on his handling of this crisis, has demanded the police use the full force of the law while knowing that law is pretty weak. Tying the police and politicians up in such knots is, however, just what Extinction Rebellion's organisers had in mind. What, though, would success look like? Humanity is pouring the equivalent of 50 billion tonnes of CO2 into the air each year, nearly double the amount in 1975, and still rising. It means Britain and the world face temperature rises of 3 to 4 degrees centigrade by 2080, and further increases to follow. Britain's own emissions and imports account for about 1 billion tonnes of that global total, and successive governments have pledged to cut that back. So far, however, they're failing miserably. Extinction Rebellion argues that this will only change when people take to the streets and force governments into reform. What but now, they say, is a small price to pay for saving the planet.
And so what came out of the protests? Well, the 3.5%, but there was some tangible goals achieved. Number one, the UK Parliament declared a climate emergency, which was the first demand of Extinction Rebellion UK. Tick. And Theresa May, for what it's worth, has committed to net zero UK carbon emissions by 2030. So what we can see is this 6-step civil disobedience model has a real chance of success. This was with 6,000 people. What could we do with 50,000 people or 60,000 people next time? So Extinction Rebellion, as I was saying, we're actually a global movement. We have chapters all over the world. Here in Ireland, you may have seen the Blood of Our Children protest last week at the Dáil that got extensive media coverage. We've also blockaded O'Connell Bridge. We've done a funeral for humanity, and we've held rallies outside the Dáil. But as I say, we are global. This is a picture taken today in Scotland, where Scottish rebels have been blockading the streets of Edinburgh while the Scottish Parliament debates the climate bill taking place there. I think 14 rebels were arrested, and they were also having a festival as well at the same time, because it has to be fun. This is in Norway. These are Extinction Rebellion protesters blockading the official residence of Prime Minister of Norway to demand that Norway divest from oil drilling all over the world, not just in Norway. This was last week in Germany when Extinction Rebellion protesters chained themselves to the gates of the federal parliament in Berlin. And there's chapters as well, affinity groups starting in West Africa. Now, because of oppressive government regimes they have to kind of be more subtle and have slightly different tactics. But we've seen across West Africa, and Ghana in particular, Extinction Rebellion chapters open. We also have chapters in Pakistan, India now, in South America, Colombia, taking part in protest marches, also taking part in what's called guerrilla gardening. Many of you will be familiar with the fact that we are losing our insects and we are losing our bees. And if the bees go, we go. So many people as well across the world are taking part in guerrilla gardening, where you plant seeds for specific pollinating plants that will allow bees and insects to reproduce. Branch and Cork have done die-ins, and Galway as well in Ireland have done funerals and done protests and have regular meetings as well. So we're really, really branched out all over the world, and in New York as well. They've shut down the Brooklyn Bridge, and in Los Angeles, actions have been taken all over the city of Los Angeles as well. So if you've heard this talk and you're wondering, I'd like to do something with Extinction Rebellion, or what do I do next to find out more? Number one, feel free to come along to our next Extinction Rebellion Dublin meeting. That's next Thursday at 7:30 at the Teachers Club at Parnell Square. Everyone's welcome. If you want to know about Extinction Rebellion's tactics, its vision for the future, how we get that transformative change, how we go beyond politics in more detail, last week we released a book. You can find it in bookstores, definitely, like on Dawson Street. I know they have it in central Dublin. It's the Extinction Rebellion Handbook. It's called This Is Not a Drill. And 3, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram to get regular updates on our actions, our meetings, and events. This is the book, This Is Not a Drill. It'll teach you not only the transformative politics we need, but also how to blockade a road. It'll also teach you how to blockade a bridge. So if you're looking for that kind of advice over the summer, it's a really good place to go and get it. And that's been me. So I hope that's been informative, interesting, and if there's any questions, let's. Thank you very much. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability, and where not possible, I'll probably refer to the handbook, because it's really good and really detailed. But if there's any questions, please hands up, I guess. Yes, sir.
Just I've been reading about this for a while, and back in the 60s, the President FDR knew that global warming was happening, and in the early 80s, NASA and other scientists knew that. They did a prediction that the planet could hold 200 million people at that time in 1981-82, that Americans could consumption. So we've known for nearly 60 years now that this has been happening, but you still get so many people kind of think it's a con,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just a way of raising taxes and stuff like that. So how do we get the other 30 or 60% of the population to understand that there is a real threat? It's not just like, you know, smoking. It took 50 years to understand it does actually do this, you know, asbestos actually does killing. People don't see it. Yeah,
absolutely.
So how do we actually get it out that, you know, it is an existential threat?
Absolutely. That's a really important point. I mean, as you say, it's been known for a very long time about the impacts of global warming, specifically in scientific communities. And in fact, the best probably example right now is, many of you might have seen the hashtag #ExxonKnew, whereby their scientists at ExxonMobil knew about climate change in the early 1970s. And they were telling their board about it, and they decided to bury it and invest in a mass public disinformation campaign, like the tobacco companies did, saying that climate change isn't real. It's really actually worth looking up. So we have to try and counteract, you know, billions of dollars of advertising and media money spent to confuse, disorientate people, and put doubt in people's minds of the scientific consensus. And even today we see in the United States that climate change denial is rife and very popular. But interestingly, it's not in countries that don't have English as their number one language, because they haven't been exposed to the same advertising. That's a bit of a side fact. So how do we get the information across to people? Well, Extinction Rebellion's first demand is that governments tell the truth to their people, and that media organizations also tell the truth to their people. And it's I agree, it's not easy, but through these protests, when we protest, we have to demand that the governments enact massive education programs for the population. We need to make sure that they are telling this in the school curriculum, but they're also getting the information to adults as well through publicly owned media networks, newspapers, just shouting it as loud as they can. We have to counteract just 20, 30 years of disinformation. It's not easy, you're right. But our first demand is governments tell the truth, media organizations tell the truth, and they need to give it huge prominence. The prominence that Brexit has gotten has been unbelievable, while at the same time we have a climate crisis that threatens our civilization and our existence. There's something massively imbalanced there. And the climate crisis has to come first. Until we're seeing it number one, number two every night on our news, we still don't have the balance right. So my answer to your question, I guess, is protest the government, protest the media until they do it. Yes, sorry. Yeah.
I'm interested, are you guys aware of 5G networks coming to the planet and how it's going to affect the planet and our own health and the ecosystem?
Sure. Oh, sorry, sorry. The question is, Extinction Rebellion, are we aware of 5G networks and how it's going to impact our civilization and our societies? Right? I think to my understanding, it's not something that we have say a set policy on, but I think it's fair to say that many people, individuals in Extinction Rebellion, keep very much up to date with 5G and what its potential is for our health and for our societies, and the potential negative effects it may have. We as a group have our focus on the climate and ecological crisis, but I'd say many people are also interested in that.
There's a small group of us in Ireland at the moment who are trying to, bring awareness about this, but it's also leading us to extinction. This network. So shouldn't we all join together, all of this? Because
yeah.
there's not a lot of people who know about
I know there's
5G,
not, yeah.
and there's trees being marked everywhere,
Yeah.
and they're coming down and calling saints for bus routes, and it's going to be too
Yeah.
late, and suddenly we're going to have this network everywhere, and it's really harmful, first of all, to insects, and once they're killed, and
Yeah.
we will become extinct eventually.
Yep. Maybe it'd be good to talk to you after this about your group and what you guys have planned. But I think that it's something we absolutely have to be aware of, and it could be a very serious issue. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's a question about kind of the concept of the non-violence.
Yep.
Because a lot of the time, you can consider your activism non-violent, but you can still face very violent oppression from the state apparatus and the police and things like that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the time, it's not really up to us defining what non-violence is. Essentially, it happens to ask the state apparatus define what they consider violent, what isn't violent. So I'm just kind of curious about how have any of these groups faced very violent oppression from the police, and I'm also curious about how some people get arrested, because radical direct action I've been involved in, there's this concept of no one gets left, there isn't a concept of people being individualized at all, that you operate in blocks, and that there's enough people there that you can resist an arrest, and you ensure that no one's kind of outside these groups, and because obviously that intensifies the potential for someone to get arrested. So I'm kind of curious how people are kind of plucked out from these crowds and get arrested. Is the concept of get arrested a part of this tactic for media coverage? Is it something that's prevented, or is it kind of a part of these tactics? Because obviously it's different for certain people to get arrested.
Yeah.
And certain communities of people, working class communities, the black community, migrant communities, it's just a totally different situation if they get arrested, or if there's offenders, people that have offended previously, and they get arrested, they're in a completely precarious situation, and it mightn't just be a couple of hours in a jail cell.
Yep.
And this idea of cross community and things like that, what is the cross community, what does that mean? How do you engage with different groups in society? And also how does that play in to this idea of people getting arrested? Because some people are more vulnerable against the state, fighting against the state, essentially.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. I'll try and answer it in parts, and if I've missed anything, just give me a shout. So one, does Extinction Rebellion, is arrests part of our strategy? Yes. We do accept that what we're doing is breaking the law, and we accept that we will be arrested. We also advise that no one who is vulnerable or is worried about being arrested or the effects of arrest on them is in an arrestable role. For the actions, for every action I'd say that we carry out, we have both arrestable roles and non-arrestable roles. So if you're confident and you're happy and you're completely feel comfortable with being arrested, you can take an arrestable role. We'll also train you to do that. If not, then you can have a role which is engaging with the press, engaging with the media, legal observer, first aid support. And so I would say for every one arrestable we have about 6 people who are supporting them in non-arrestable roles. How are people arrested? How has that happened? We've seen all across the world, because we're an international movement, police having different reactions to Extinction Rebellion protests. What we saw in London, the police, because they killed a protester during the G20 protests about 10 years previously, had a new set of guidelines they were using, which was very, let's say, lenient towards peaceful protest, and which kind of hamstrung them a little bit in the way that they dealt with us. But we see in France, where the police are far harsher, that when Extinction Rebellion protesters took part in a protest there, they were pepper sprayed, and violent tactics were used against them. Police are absolutely different everywhere, and it's up to individuals whether they feel confident taking part in arrestable roles. From my own experience, I found that when you're arrested, or you could be in an arrestable position, it can be different every single time. In London, it felt very random. If I had occasions where the person to the left of me was arrested, the person to the right of me was arrested, I wasn't arrested. Sometimes they just ran out of police officers because they were trying to they couldn't arrest as many of us as they wanted. When I took part in Copenhagen climate protests, they had full heavy riot police, they had dogs, they had everything. They had snatch squads, and I was actually taken out by a snatch squad, which was different. So I would say my advice to anyone taking part in these actions is you never know what to expect. You absolutely have to look at what your personal setup is and decide whether if you can be an arrestable rule or non-arrestable rule. And the police will not always, treat you with care and respect. They can absolutely be violent towards you, and it can be very, very rough, and it can be very difficult. And I would say, when that cell door closes behind you in the jail cell as well, it can be a very kind of lonely and difficult experience. Some people say, it's liberating. Personally, I don't find it that way. Everyone's different. So I would not tell anyone to kind of say, hey, I want to go out and be arrested at all. It's a very stressful and emotional experience, and you want to be well prepared for that. Did I answer your question at all? I hope so, in there somewhere.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about why being arrested is a tactic. Because obviously, like, you're losing some of your, like, maybe your best organizers for a period of time. And I'm wondering, what is the kind of benefit to it? Is it purely like a media coverage concept, or kind of what is the benefit of people being arrested? Because to me, it's like, surely resisting an arrest is an atmosphere where people feel solidarity, and I mean, there's always potential people will be plucked out, but it just seems, I'm just confused about why there wouldn't be the solidarity with resisting an arrest, and what is the reason for the tactic?
It's showing that basically that you have freely accepted that you are in rebellion against the government, that you believe the social bonds to be broken, the government is not protecting you, it's not protecting your children. So you willfully are going out and breaking the law, and you accept responsibility for that. So you do not resist arrest. You say, I am doing this, and this is why I'm doing it. My cause is righteous, my cause is just. Arrest me. That also has the benefits of media coverage. In this world, unfortunately, I think there's a quote from a Guardian journalist that you get 5 arrestees, you're on the front cover. You get no arrestees, you're nowhere. It is a way of spreading word and of your movement and what you're doing about it. So to your question, one part of it is media tactic. The other part is just kind of standing up and going, I am rebelling, and I accept the consequences of that because my cause is just. Any other questions? I think. Yes, ma'am.
I know it's quite recent, so I'm not really sure if you have Extinction Rebellion generally have a view on it, but I wondered what your thoughts were on the government's climate action plan.
I was going to ask the same thing.
Yeah, I was wondering that question. Thanks. Government's climate action plan. Put most simply, our second demand is that Ireland go carbon neutral by 2030. That there's legally binding policy measures to go carbon neutral by 2030, because if you see the science section at the front, we are already potentially in a state that we can't get out of and heading for civilizational collapse. We have to get our emissions to zero to survive, and second of all, as one of the richer countries in the world, we need to get to net zero first, so that other countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America can spend carbon budgets that we have, the little we have remaining, on infrastructure that's going to protect them from rising temperatures and natural disasters. So we not only need to get to zero by 2030 to save our own skins, but actually we have a moral imperative to do it as well. So Extinction Rebellion's response would be non-legally binding. Wouldn't it be nice to get to zero by 2050? Isn't enough. We need legally binding commitments for 2030. Therefore, the plan does not go far enough. Also, this plan is full of maybes. We are going to aim for. We should target. None of this is yet legally binding. The can can be kicked down the road. The thing that matters is how much carbon are we actually putting out into the atmosphere. It is the thing that we need to only look at and measure is how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere, how much we're putting out, and if it's coming down. That is what matters. Yes, sir.
I think one of the problems is that a lot of people believe the government, okay?
So who's giving this advice to the government that they're saying 2050 is okay? Who's right and who's wrong? Because certainly if I talk to my friends and people about climate change, they look at me blankly and they're trying to say, well, wait a second, if it's that serious, the government will do something about it. So what's happening with the government and their advisors versus your advice?
Sure. So the good thing, at least I think, about my advice is that when it comes from NASA, it comes from the world leading scientists, the United Nations. Government's advice comes from scientists as well, but added into that mix is lobbyists, it's the fossil fuel industry, it's big agribusiness, and it's their own fact that they won't live to see the effects of this as well play out, whatever they decide to do. And we have short electoral cycles, so they're looking for, to be re-elected soon. So whereas Extinction Rebellion can look at the science and go, let's act accordingly, the problem with our governments, and this is why we are in favor of more citizens' assemblies approach. The governments are thinking, oh, look at that science, that's really bad, but I've got fossil fuel industry, agribusiness, etc., all pressing me as well, and I've got an electorate to get re-elected in. And that is why we get very different plans from what is scientifically necessary and what our politicians are trying to do and get away with, so they can, say they've done their bit and then sally off into the horizon and leave us all.
So the thing I'm taking notes is that for this, and I agree, obviously, that's why I'm here. For this to succeed, you've got to get the majority of people on your side, which is what Martin Luther King had with the black people. It's what people in Northern Ireland had as well. In other words, the 3.5% will cause disruption.
Yeah.
But sometimes what you see in the media is people saying, yeah, they prevented me from getting to work.
Yeah.
So that's not the right reaction.
Yeah.
It actually may work against us as opposed to getting people on board.
Yeah. And I think the media's changed, I think, in Ireland over the last 6 months, actually, significantly, its coverage of climate change. It used to be you'd have a climate denier versus, a scientist. Now at least you've got a climate delayer versus a scientist. I have to say, from my experiences in London on the ground, is, like, completely honestly, we got an incredible amount of support from people, from motorists, from taxi drivers. So many people joined us that the police couldn't tell a protester from someone who'd just come along for a good time. But what you see in the media is they need controversy, they need argument. So they need someone going, this is a pain in my ass, this is ruining my day. What we actually try to do for those people is we'll put up signs where the disruption is going to take place, try and say we apologize for the disruption, this is why we're doing it. And as you'll see if you read the Extinction Rebellion handbook, one of the rules for blocking a road is to bring cakes or treats for drivers and try and hand them out. And talk to them and say, this is not, we apologize for the disruption to you, but it's our government's inaction on the climate crisis and ecological crisis that are doing this, and we have to do it because otherwise we're all going to die. Yes, sir.
I speak as somebody who has been involved in the environmental movement for about the last 5 years, and I would compliment hugely Extinction Rebellion on the activities they've engaged in. I'm fully supportive of them. I can see the benefit. I was involved in the Dublin Housing Action Committee back in the 60s, and I was mindful when I sat on O'Connell Bridge in the recent demonstration. The last time I sat there, I was beaten off it by a policeman and ended up in hospital for 10 days in the matter with a broken bone in my spine. Now, what I do feel is that the action plan of the government is a victory for Extinction Rebellion and for all the environmentalists. And I think we need to recognise it as that, but be very clear that it's not enough, it won't do it. And there's a difficulty that a lot of our supporters will feel, oh, we've got there. Yeah. They have this plan, it's all over, we don't need to do any more. No, the thing is, when you start to make a gain, that's when you need to put the pressure on. That's when you need to get more people out. That's when you need to be very clear, this is good, but it's not enough. We need more. The other thing that our government has failed on in the past, and will continue to fail on, we don't have an impact at international level. We're voting the wrong way in the European Union. Like, probably the biggest possibility for getting change in farming is through the CAP and at the European Union. We're voting the wrong way. We're doing the wrong thing. And you've somebody like Big Phil, who, as he's departing the position, is now advising that farmers reduce their beef herd and that they grow more trees. He didn't say that for the last 5 years when he was there.
Yeah.
So I just think that it's a tricky situation, but it's one that we really want to be very clear on, that we've made gains, and it's a result of the action people have engaged in. But it's not enough, and we need to increase the pressure.
No, thank you very much. I completely agree. Between the student strikes, Extinction Rebellion, and other groups, we have shown that by applying pressure to our political system, they will acknowledge there is a problem. That is where we've gotten to, and they've come up with a plan. In Ireland as well, everything you say, I agree with you. We are great at making plans, and we suck at implementing. Like, we can build a plan for a children's hospital, we can come up with a national broadband strategy, but my God, do we suck at doing it. And that is where this is going to get, we're really going to have to push them and force them, not just on implementation, but implementing it in a just way, in a way that doesn't put the burden on the people who have done the least to cause this crisis. The burden must fall on the biggest emitters in dealing with this, and that's going to be a very important push over the next few years as well. I'm going to do 2 more questions before we all melt like an ice cap. So apologies if you've had your hand up for a long time and I don't call you, but I think, sir, you've had your hand up for quite a while. So.
Yeah, it's not really a question. I'd just like to say you're a courageous man, and I really appreciate what you're doing.
Cheers.
I've been coming to meetings for a long time, and I was thinking of giving it all up. And I thought, yeah, no, I did. I thought to myself one day, it's not happening, we're going to meetings. But one thing I know, my conscience is clear. And I can look at my grandchildren and children and say, at least I tried.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
At least I tried. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of it for a lot of the Extinction Rebellions, that a lot of rebels don't think we have a chance, but they're doing it because...
I'm fully convinced that it's too late.
Yeah. The science may agree with you.
I'm looking at the science for the past 4 or 5 years, and the scientists that have given up, they're saying no.
Yeah.
But we have to try, we have to keep going, and my conscience is clear that I'm trying.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. I'm going to do one last question. Yes, sir. I'll go you, yeah.
Yeah, so
Sorry to everyone else.
Is Extinction Rebellion process the perfect place to bring one's children? Even one engaged?
Yeah. Some protests is the answer to that. Like, for example, Blood of Our Children that we did last week at the Dáil. I think in our announcement we said over 16s only, because it was quite a visceral protest that involved blood. But whereas when we blockaded O'Connell Bridge, there was lots of children there. There was kids, and they were playing and having a great time. So the answer is it kind of depends on the protest and the form of protest. And what we'll always try and do is say if this is something you can bring kids to, or something that might be a little bit more heavy and isn't kids appropriate. One of the great things that I saw in London, like on Waterloo Bridge, where we actually converted it into like a garden bridge, which was a riff on Boris Johnson's failed garden bridge. We put loads of trees on the bridge, but we put like a mini skateboard park for kids, and there was play areas for kids. So when there was less pressure from the police, which is mostly during the daytime, because they arrested mostly at night, there's loads of kids playing football and playing with the trees and skateboarding. So trying to create those spaces for kids is very important. And in fact, in Scotland, in the protest they're on right now, one of the first things they did in the agenda was what they called a wee rebellion. And so they had a space for families with kids, and so that the parents could be kind of like NVDA trained or to get legal observer training, while the kids could play around and had activities for them as well. So that's so to answer your question, I think is some are appropriate, some not so, but I think as a movement we try to be as inclusive as possible.
What are those coming up?
I don't know. What we're trying to organize next are like, hopefully there'll definitely be protests before this, but there's been a massive mass mobilization from across the world called for the 20th of September. Greta Thunberg's called for that. Many people have called for that. That coincides with a big climate meeting at the United Nations. And so that I would absolutely see as a world disruption taking place, be a space that we must make accessible for families and kids to take part in as well, because it has to be something for all ages and all generations to take part in as a mass mobilization. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very, very much. I will probably have a drink downstairs, so if you've got any burning questions while I sip some wine, feel free.
Can I just take the room for a second? I'm with Kieran in the Extinction Rebellion also. I'd just like to say to you, thanks to Kieran for doing this presentation, but there's extinctionrebellioниreland.com is a website. You can join an email list there. There's a very active Facebook channel, Extinction Rebellion Ireland. Please connect there. We have Twitter as well. We're quite active there. There's Instagram, so it's for everybody. We're all over. And what we're looking for, I guess, is local communities to organize. So when we do a mass protest that Extinction Rebellion Goatstown, come along and take the front lines, 20, 30, 50, 100 of you, and if there's arrestees there, that you would kind of put yourselves forward and you have a support team. Extinction Rebellion Rathmines come in. We're looking for self-organizing groups to manage. We're not kind of paid and administrators and lots of funding to support this. We're looking for self-organizing to take place, and we're looking for your support in that way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.